excited to be here to talk to you about a prison ministry, but there's a message in here for all of us. I mean, a lot of you will probably never go inside of a prison by choice, but there are ways that you can be involved in prison ministry and stay exactly where you are. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that I've learned very quickly is that when you go into the places in the world where the brokenness of the world is most obvious, the good news is really good news. It is receptive inside those areas. So if you look in Matthew 25, Jesus tells us when he comes to his ultimate glory, he's going to be surrounded by all of his holy angels. He's going to be sitting on his glorious throne. And he's going to have people from all over the world around him. And he's going to divide the people. He's going to put some on his right, and the remainder he's going to put on his left. And to those on his right, he's going to say, "Enter in to the glories of the Lord. Come, accept your inheritance. Those of you who have been blessed by the Father, accept your reward. Because when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. And when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I needed something to wear, you gave me clothes. When I was sick, you took care of me. And when I was in prison, you came to visit me." And then those on the right hand will, I believe, they'll look confused. And they'll say, I'm going to ad lib here a little bit, but they're going to say, "Jesus, we don't remember any of that." They say, maybe it was, that time when we were in that awesome worship service. The music was phenomenal. The preaching and the teaching was off the charts. We could just feel your presence all around us. Maybe that's when we almost saw you. Or maybe it's that time when we were at youth camp. We were focused on you for a solid week. We prayed a lot. We studied your word a lot. We had constant Christian fellowship. And then we ended it with this campfire service that was just incredible. We could just feel your presence all around us. Maybe, Jesus, that's when we almost saw you. Because we don't remember seeing you hungry or thirsty. We don't remember seeing you sick or needing clothes. We certainly never took care of you when you were sick. We don't even remember you being sick. And we certainly didn't visit you in prison. And then Jesus will say, and don't miss this, and the King, Jesus, will answer them and say, "Truly, I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brother, you did it to me." So Jesus is saying, when we minister to what he calls the least of these, it's like we're doing it to him. When we minister to the broken, when we minister to those who are the outcast, it's like we're ministering to the one that we worship. When we do things to the forgotten, the forsaken, the unpopular, Jesus says, it's just like you do it to me. Isn't that an incredible thing? Well, Jesus is saying, he's inviting us to be part of his plan to restore the world, to restore his family, to bring his family back together. And you know what? We do that one person at a time. We do that one person at a time. We do this by demonstrating God's love to those around us, by meeting a need, by allowing God to love them through us. Jesus knows that the world we live in is broken. We talked about that a little bit in Michelle's Sunday school class this morning. The world is broken. And you know what? Jesus knows it's broken. As a matter of fact, he was there in the Garden of Eden when we broke it. Okay? And at that moment, the way I have it pictured in my mind's eye is just as we broke the world, as sin entered the world through the choice of mankind, God had a choice to make. Was God going to leave us in our brokenness? Was he going to leave us to deal with the consequences of the choice that we had made? Or was God going to do something? Was he going to do whatever it took to provide the way back to him? Well, thankfully, God chose to provide the way back to him. God chose to do whatever it took to restore the broken relationship, because that's what love does. That's what love does. So every person, every single person is created in the image of God. And when I could sit up here and some of you know, talk a long time about that subject, I'm not. Every person is created in the image of God. What does that really mean? Well, that means that every person you come into contact with, the cashier at Walmart, the waitress at the restaurant you go to after I'm finished, every single person you ever meet is an immortal being. They have an eternal soul. And that means that they will live forever somewhere. And it's part of that image of God in us that I think if you think about deep down, we all want to live in a world that's not dominated by the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the richest, or the smartest. Because of the image of God in us, deep down we desire to be part of a world that's dominated by love, a world that's dominated by grace. That's the image of God in every human, I believe. But you know what? The way we talked about this morning, that's not the world we live in, is it? It's not the world we live in. The world is broken. And you know what? We're broken. I'm broken. I can't fix it. If I could have my way, I would want to be a brand new person. And you know what? I don't think that's a naive request. I think it can happen. Matter of fact, I think it is already happening. And it all starts with our brokenness. You know, as counterintuitive as it is, there's great power in our brokenness. Psalm 51 says this, "For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering." The sacrifices of God, and don't miss this, are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. A broken and a contrite heart. Paul in 2 Corinthians says this, "But he said to me," God speaking to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in," what's that next word? Weakness. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me." There is great power in our weakness, in our brokenness. You know, I think Paul was in the process of becoming a brand new person. I mean, Paul, before Jesus, was quite different, wasn't he? I mean, Paul was he was a smart guy, highly educated. I think in today's terms, he would have multiple PhDs. He was a really smart guy. But he also combined that intelligence and quickness with a drive. Paul was what we would call today as a type A personality. He was a get-it-done kind of guy. When Paul got focused on something, it didn't matter who or what got in his way. He would run over it. But then Paul met Jesus. Very familiar story. Acts chapter 9. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul. And Saul was his Hebrew name. Greek name was Paul. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting? And I've not finished that statement yet, because I think it's really interesting what the words that Jesus used here. What Jesus didn't say was, Saul, why are you persecuting my church? Didn't say that. He didn't say, Saul, why are you persecuting my brothers and sisters? Why are you persecuting my friends? Why are you persecuting my followers? He didn't say any of that. What's the next word? Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Me. Why did Jesus choose those words? Well, I think the implications is unmistakable. The implication is that whatever we do to our brothers and sisters, whatever we do to our friends, it's just like we're doing it to Christ. Remember, I started this by saying, whatever Jesus said, whatever you do to the least of these, it's like you're doing it to me. Whatever you do to my church, it's like you're doing it to me. Well, see, when Paul, from this moment, the whole direction of Paul's life changed. Now, one of the things I want you to take away from this, Paul was becoming a brand new person. But God used his past. He used the smart Paul, the educated Paul, the Paul that was driven to accomplish things and do things. He used all of Paul's past for God's purposes. You see, before Jesus, Paul thought he was doing what God wanted him to do. After Jesus, he knew he was wrong. So God used his past experiences, his education, his personality to accomplish God's purposes. And Paul reached the known world at that time with the message of Jesus Christ. Paul ended up writing roughly half of what we call the New Testament, all after this moment. So Paul is an example for us. God wants to do the same thing with us. You see, he wants to use you exactly where you are. He wants to use you in all your weakness and brokenness, and he's inviting you to be part of his plan to restore the world, to restore his family. He wants to use you to bring lots of love and grace into the world. But a lot of times we tend to think, I really don't have anything to offer. I don't have the skills, I don't have the gifts necessary for God to use me. Maybe you think God can't use me because of something in my past. Well, you know, I want you to picture the cross-section of a tree. You know, from a cross-section of a tree, you can tell a lot more than just the age of the tree. You can actually see the life of that tree. You can see the times that were good, plentiful, the years where everything was good. You can also see the times where it was leaner, maybe a drought or lack of nutrients. You can also see the times of extreme stress in that tree. You can see maybe it's a time where the tree had to endure a fire, or maybe it was struck by lightning. In the rings, you can see the life of the tree. And when you take the wood from that tree and put it in the hands of the craftsman, you put it in the hands of the artist, the life of the tree becomes the thing that creates the beauty of the tree. The stresses that tree went under create the beauty in the grain. And in the hands of the artist, this tree becomes something of great beauty, something of great value. It becomes a work of art in the hands of the craftsman. And you know what? God wants to do exactly the same thing with you. He wants to use your past. He wants to use the good times in your life, the bad times in your life, and dare I even say, the sin that has been a part of your life. He wants to use all of that to create a work of art that is more beautiful than you can imagine. But there's a big difference between us and a tree, isn't there? We have a choice. You see, we have a choice. We can choose not to allow ourselves to be put into the hands of the master artist, into the hands of God. And you know what? We make this choice every single day, in small ways and in big ways. I mean, do you ever wonder why you make the choices you make? I do. I mean, do you ever feel like you're spinning your wheels, trying so hard and never moving forward? Yeah, me too. Do you ever want to be part of something big and meaningful? You want to be part of something that really makes life worth living? Do you want to be part of something that's bigger than yourself instead of just doing the same things that you do over and over again? Yeah, I do too. And you know, it all begins with a simple choice. A choice to act, to take a risk, to get outside of our comfort zone. I want to encourage you, don't be afraid to act. I really like this quote from Mother Teresa. It says, not all of us can do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. Let me read that again. Not all of us can do great things, but every single one of us can do small things with great love. Guys, small things done with great love will transform lives. Ultimately, it's what we do. What we do. You know, it's not our best intentions. It's not what I say. It's not even my great ideas or our great ideas. Ultimately, it's what we do, how we act, that makes the difference. Small things done with great love transform lives. Because guys, you know, there are so many people that will never be able to experience God's love and grace until they see it done through the Christian community, through our local body, through you and through me, through our actions, what we do. And when we act, it will allow God to love them through us. And when God loves them through us, they start to see a possibility for the world like they want it to be. A world dominated by love and a world dominated by grace. Jesus came into a really dark world. He came into the dark world to provide the way back to God. We agree with that. But I think it's more than that. God provided our way back to God, but He also came to show us how to live a significant life in a fallen world. I didn't say successful life necessarily. He came to show us how to live a significant life, to make a difference, to be a light in a dark world. That's why I believe He stayed 33 years, to show us how to live a significant life. Jesus said in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will live the light of life. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are the light of the world. John tells us in chapter 1, one of my favorite pieces of scripture, talking about Jesus. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness has not overcome it. Now, incredibly powerful words of Scripture. But when we just take a step back and think about the context in which this was written, it goes off the charts. You see, the Gospel of John was written later than the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John was likely getting near the end of his life when he wrote the Gospel of John. And by the time he wrote these words that we read on the screen here, John had seen some darkness like we can't imagine. He had seen a lot of really bad stuff. By the time John wrote these words, most of his friends had been killed. History tells us that Peter was crucified upside down. By the time John wrote these words, Paul had likely been beheaded by Nero in Rome. But yet, through all of this evil that John had seen, through all of the turmoil, through all of the grief, through all of the death, he writes, "The light shines in the darkness." The light shines in the darkness. And the darkness has not, and I'm going to add, will not overcome it. So, darkness does not consume light. Light always overtakes darkness. As a matter of fact, and you know this, the darker the night becomes, the brighter the light appears. The darker the night, the brighter the light. And you know, it gets even more amazing because we get to be a part of this. Before Jesus left, he actually transferred this light and this responsibility to us. In Matthew 5, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Let your light shine before others. It's the reason I was really happy to see this March for Marley. It's certainly a ministry to this family that's had an unbelievable tragedy. But it's also a way for this community to see, to let the light shine. They see God working through you. An awesome thing. So we're the light of the world. We're the hope of the world. Thankfully, we don't have to do it alone. We have one another, and most importantly, we have God in us. God in us. Think about that. Sometimes I think, this is an extra, sometimes I think we make the mistake of thinking God is in this building. He's not in this building. If you're a follower of Jesus, He's in you. The instant that Jesus died, God left the temple and resided in the hearts of believers. That's a power that is hard to describe, isn't it? Bill Hybels in one of his books, he made this statement that I looked at it cross-eyed when I first read it many years ago. He said, the local church is the hope of the world. The local church, the hope of the world, this gathering of people that Jesus established more than 2,000 years ago, is the hope of the world. It spread inexplicably around the globe in an extraordinarily short period of time. And the more I thought about that statement, the more I think it's true. The local church is the hope of the world. Well, let's make it specific. FFWBC is the hope of the world. Not your job, not your government, not your political party, not your spouse, not your job, but the local church. FFWBC is the hope of the world. What do you think about that? Does that excite you or does that scare you? Or a little bit of both? For me, it's a lot of both. That's a big responsibility. Well, I've been blessed with the opportunity to be a part of taking God's light into one of the darkest places that you can imagine. About 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to get involved with a group called Kairos Prison Ministries. It's a group of men that go into the prison for 2 4-day weekends each year, once in the spring and once in the fall. We go in for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we take 42 men at a time through what's called a short course in Christianity. But it is so much more than that. So when I signed up for this, I really didn't know what I was getting into. To say this was out of my comfort zone, well, that was an understatement. I really didn't know what I was getting into. But the way it works is a team is formed each spring and each fall, and we begin meeting for 10 weeks before we go into the prison. We meet 3 hours each week on this time it's on a Thursday night, from 6 to 9 o'clock at night, to prepare ourselves. We prepare ourselves mentally, emotionally, and yes, spiritually. These men that agree to do this, it's a big commitment. I mean, we're taking the love of Jesus Christ into a really, really dark place. And the way it works is we have 42 men that go in to minister to 42 of the inmates. And the whole program is structured around what's called 10 sermons. 10 sermons, we actually call them talks. And then there's music, praise music and hymns, and then small group discussion. And each of the men is divided up into groups of 6 inmates around a round table, 6 inmates, a table leader, an assistant table leader, and a member of the clergy or a pastor is at each table. And the intent is to have these talks and then to get the men to talk about what they've heard. Sometimes the conversation goes easy, sometimes not so easy. I mean, you'll have a very diverse group typically at each table. Sometimes you'll have people with a Christian background. Sometimes you'll have people with a Muslim background, almost always. Sometimes you have people with no religious background. Occasionally, and the first time this happened to me, I had to take a deep breath. You have someone that identifies as a Wicca. For those of you who don't know what that means, that's a witch. And sometimes we have those that are transgender. We also almost always have gang leaders. MS-13, Crips, the Bloods, the Aryan Nation are part of these groups. So it's not a boring weekend. There is some tension in the room at times, but it's a place where you see God's love like it's hard to describe. So that's kind of how the program works. And I could tell you a lot of God stories. But let me start. I want to tell you one. But it just continually highlights to me when you go to places where the brokenness of the world is most obvious, the good news is really good news. So let me tell you one God story. This happened on my first weekend in the prison. It was roughly 5 years ago. And first time in, and I've been given the role of the assistant table leader. So I'm at one of the tables with 6 of the inmates. And my job is to help the table leader keep the discussion on track and keep things moving in the right direction. Well, as I took my place, and there's names, we're assigned seats, and just to my immediate left was a man whose street name was J-Dog. His given name was James. And James, James had done some really horrific things in his life. But suffice it to say, James will never see the outside of a prison. But James was a really, really quiet guy. But he was extremely influential inside the prison. He was a gang leader. And you could tell by the way the other men interacted with him. They would serve him. They would bring him things. They would look for him for approval to what they could do and what they couldn't do. He approved them going to the bathroom. James was a hard man. Now, as I said, James was really quiet, and I told you my role was to get them talking about this stuff. James wouldn't have anything to do with that, at least in the beginning. And so one of the talks that we had was on forgiveness. And during the small group discussion, I'm trying to get James to speak, and he's just there for the food. We give him a lot of food. He's just not saying anything. So we finished that talk, and we're on a break. And we're just kind of standing around drinking coffee. And James comes up to me, and he says, "I've committed the unforgivable sin." Me being a lifelong church person, my mind goes over totally in left field. I didn't know what to say. He said, "I've committed the unforgivable sin." I said, "What do you mean, James?" J-Dog. He said, "I've taken another man's life. That's unforgivable." In the mind of James, he was beyond forgiveness, God's or anybody else's. A little bit later, the band was playing, and yes, we take a band into the prison. The band was playing the song, 10,000 Reasons. I don't know how closely you pay attention to the lyrics of that song, but it's not typically the song that I would think of as a hardcore gang leader connecting with. But I noticed James was not singing, but listening very carefully. And then after the song, or actually while the song was playing, probably for the third time that weekend, he comes and says, I kind of like that song. I kind of like that song. God used that song to soften the heart of J-Dog, a hardcore gang member from Memphis. So that song obviously has a special place in my heart. So we listened to that song. And then we went on with the program, and there was a talk on grace and reasons to believe. And during that small group discussion, one of the inmates looked directly at me and said, not James, looked at me and said, "Why do you believe? Why do you believe?" Have you thought about that question? Thankfully, I had. So I said something in the nature of this. I said, well, for me, if there were ever people on the face of this earth that knew who Jesus was beyond any shadow of a doubt, it was the original apostles. Those 12 that knew him best, because they saw him in public, they saw him in private. They saw the miracles. They heard the teaching. They heard Jesus say that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. And they believed it. They bought into it. They left their life. But then, Jesus died. And you know what? They did exactly what you and I would have done had we been faced in that situation. They ran to the hills in fear Because number one, they figured they had to be next. If they could get Jesus, they had to be coming after them. But number two, the fact that Jesus died told them that everything that they had given their lives for up to that point wasn't true. Because the Messiah can't die, can he? So they thought that they had given their life to something that wasn't real. But then, a few days later, they saw the resurrected Jesus alive in the flesh, not a spirit, in the flesh. And when they saw a resurrected Jesus, it changed the course of their entire life. So much so that history tells us that the vast majority of them died. Not for what they believed. People die for what they believe every day. The September the 11th hijackers died for what they believed. These guys died for what they had seen, what they knew to be true. And I said, that's why I believe. And I'll never forget what happened next. James, J-Dog, looked directly at me, and with eyes as serious as I have ever seen, said in his gang accent, nobody would die for a scam. Nobody would die for a scam. To which I said, I don't think so either. A few hours later, James found the forgiveness that he thought was beyond him. James, for the first time in his life, experienced grace. And I can tell you, beyond any doubt, today James is a light in one of the darkest places you can imagine. James, a man who was used to being served, is now serving others inside of prison. So, ladies and gentlemen, let there be no doubt, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you're the light of the world, wherever you find yourself. Amen. Make no mistake about it. So, as I begin to wrap up here, maybe you're wondering, what do you do with all this stuff that I've talked about? Well, first of all, let me just say this. If you haven't made the decision to be a follower of Jesus Christ, this is something that I would love to talk to you about, to making that step. And I'm sure there's other gentlemen up here that would love to have that conversation with you. I'd say just come up after I'm finished and we will have that conversation. Most important conversation you will ever have. Or maybe you're already a follower of Jesus and you're wondering, what do I need to do with all this? Maybe there's lies that are starting to bounce around in your head. Lies like, I really don't think I have anything to offer. For me, and we would never say this out loud, my Christian walk is really about coming to church on Sunday morning, checking that box, and it really doesn't have a lot of impact in the rest of my life. We challenge you to think differently. Think about taking another step in your Christian walk. I'd ask you to think about this. What are you holding on to that's holding you back? What are you holding on to that's holding you back? Maybe you're in a different kind of prison. Maybe you're in a prison of complacency. You really just don't care. Maybe you're in a prison of comfort and you like your comfort zone. Maybe that's possible. Maybe you're tied up in a prison of, perfection. What do I mean by that? Well, if I try something new, I may not do it right. And if I'm not going to do it right, I'm not going to do it at all. I'm not even going to try. You know what? It's these prisons that keep you from reaching your potential, your God-given potential for Him. Remember, God said He wants you to be part of His plan to restore His family. You know, a friend of mine I heard say one time, the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you discover why you were born. God is inviting you to discover why you were born and be part of His plan to restore the world. So if you're struggling with some ideas here, let me give you some things that I would encourage you to take seriously. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. Jesus says, I will use you where you are, period. No qualification. And you are part of God's plan to restore His family. So I'm going to ask you, if there's something in here that's piqued something in your mind or piqued something in your heart, why don't you take out a pencil? I'm going to give you 3 sentences to write down. These things are actionable, they're timely, and they're specific. And I'm going to ask you to do these this week. Write these down. I am the light of the world. I'm choosing to make myself available to the master craftsman. I'm choosing to make myself available to the master craftsman. And here's where it gets serious. This week, I'm going to do for one what I wish I could do for everyone. This week, I'm going to do for one what I wish I could do for everyone. What Jesus would call the least of these. All right? So guys, that's the end of the sermon. Now I've got an opportunity for you. I mentioned that I'm involved with Kairos Prison Ministries, and I will be going into the prison April the 16th through the 19th of this year. Our team meetings have already started. We're well on our way. And one of the things that I'm not going to ask you to go into the prison, to go behind the razor wire or the gates, but I am going to ask you or give you the opportunity to be part of prison ministry from right here. One of the things that they ask each man to do is to bring in 100 dozen cookies each. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of people like, wow, yeah, that's a lot of cookies. Let me tell you why it's a lot of cookies. These things are known within the prison as Jesus cookies at this point. And I consider that a good thing. They look forward to these 2 weekends a year. But the 42 men that go through the program, each evening they're given a dozen cookies to take back to their cell with them. Except on Saturday night, they're given 2 dozen cookies. And the second dozen are called forgiveness cookies. So the challenge that we give them is the 1 dozen is for you. The second dozen is for someone in this compound that you need to forgive. And you give those cookies to that person you need to forgive. Pretty tough, isn't it? I mean, it would be tough for us to do that. Imagine that in the prison context. But that's what we challenge them to do. But then after they disperse back to go give out their forgiveness cookies, the men that do the program, me for example, we spread out through the entire compound and we deliver a dozen cookies to every man at the prison. And today there are roughly 1,800 men at Northeast Correctional Complex. And they get each one, we visit every single cell, shake a hand, God bless you. These are Kairos cookies. That's why we need so many cookies. So if you feel so inclined to use your gift, we don't want store-bought cookies. The cookies have to spend time in your oven. Okay? Now you can get the refrigerated ones and break them apart. That's what I do. Or you can go homemade. But they need to be packaged kind of in a plastic bag like a Ritz cracker. This allows them to be transported to prison without arriving in a bunch of crumbs. But in a bag, and you tape it, okay? I would encourage you, it can be complex if I gave you the full instructions, but let me just, if you choose to do this, do either chocolate chip or peanut butter. Don't do any other kind. Why do I say that? Well, if you do cookies that have fruit in them or icing on them, they do things with the fruit and the icing that are not good to do. Let me just leave it at that. They make it into what they call hooch pretty quickly. So peanut butter, chocolate chip. And if you choose to do that, there's a sign-up sheet out back. Just write your name and put the number of dozen you choose to do. If I end up with more than 100 dozen, that's an awesome thing. They will not go to waste. So you can be part of prison ministry by baking cookies. You can also be part of prison ministry through prayer. And if you're so willing, there's another sign-up sheet out here that if you say, yeah, I will commit to praying for the weekend, I will put your first name only on a piece of paper like this. And these papers will be used to form a prayer chain that will go around the gymnasium that we're meeting in. And the object lesson for the inmates is there are people all over this region, thousands of them, that are praying for you this weekend. So if you're willing to have your name on there, you can sign up the sheet here, or I've got my phone number. Give me a text. Don't worry, I'm not going to put your name, full name and address on one of these and put it inside the prison, okay? I'll put your first name only, and we'll use that to form a prayer chain. The other thing that we can choose to get the children involved with are these placemats. So we feed them several meals, and at each of the tables is a placemat that they eat their meal on. And the children from the churches that are involved will draw a scene, a Bible scene, a Bible verse, a word of encouragement, and we'll take those into the prison. You say, well, that seems like a really small thing. And for us it is. But these placemats are treasured by the men that go through this program. Several times I've seen them, they won't eat on them. They will take them back to their cell and hang them up. So I think I mentioned this to Amanda. We may get the children involved in creating some of these placemats if we're so interested. So cookies or prayer, or how you can go into the prison ministry with me on April the 16th through the 19th. Okay? And if you have any questions, feel free to ask Linda. She'll give you all the information you need to know. All right? So with that, I will turn it back over to Earl, and hopefully I didn't go too long.
Hey, would you stand with me for just a moment? We're going